Thank you, and good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. We want to have this briefing, which will be a series of briefings, and the Chief will talk about that, to make sure that everybody knows what's going on in our community, but also to make sure that everyone knows how committed the city is to making sure that we do everything possible to end what we think is an unacceptable level of violence. I appreciate the mayor being here, appreciate Councilmember Bateman being here. I will assure you that the mayor and the council are absolutely committed as their #1 priority to make sure that we do everything we can. Because, frankly, 31 homicides is unacceptable. 20 homicides is unacceptable. 10 are unacceptable. No level of homicides are acceptable for our city. We really must do something about it. I'm here to talk because it isn't just a policing issue, it's a community issue. We need to do everything we can within city government. We also need the community to do everything it can as well. We have a situation, let's be very clear about this. We don't have a situation where everybody in the city is at risk every minute of the day. We have a situation where there are a tremendous number of guns that exist, illegal guns, within our city, and they're used to settle any grudge that happens, any dispute between two people, it seems. Some people think the way to resolve that is to take a gun out and shoot somebody. Whether it's a drug deal gone bad, a domestic issue, many number of circumstances which that happens, and that's unacceptable. It doesn't hit most of Newport News, but it hits a lot of folks, and that is unacceptable. This is something that's happening throughout our country, but we're going to make sure that it does not happen any longer in Newport News. We're going to do everything we can, and the Chief is here to talk about it. I do want to say I have total confidence in Chief Myers, total confidence in his assistant chiefs, and captains, lieutenants, sergeants. Every police officer we have is doing an outstanding job in this city. And I know Chief Myers will talk a little bit about what they're doing and what differences it's making as well. So thank you all for being here on a very short notice. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Bateman as well, on a very short notice for being here. And I'd like to introduce Chief Myers. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all very much for being here today. I'll add my Happy New Year greeting to the list. With the new year comes a renewed commitment on our part to work tirelessly to reduce violence in our community. Our intention is to make this a recurring conversation, perhaps twice a month to start, so that we can provide greater context to the stories reported by the media. We recognize that the print media and the broadcast media are obligated to report on acts of violence. And to that end, we believe the staff of the Newport News Police make an extreme effort to be accessible and responsive to media representatives. In fact, I repeatedly hear from reporters and news editors alike that they wish all police agencies in the region put as much energy into developing the respectful relationship that we enjoy with the traditional media. Sometimes, however, it seems to us that the ease at which we release detailed information results in an inordinate focus on crime in Newport News, and is often the case when news media needs to pursue the breaking story. There's insufficient follow-up and an absence of context. Therefore, we intend on using these briefings to provide a more complete picture of the ultimate consequences when persons commit violent crimes, because our community deserves to know that we don't rest until we get dangerous people off the street. Yesterday afternoon, as I was preparing for this briefing, I received a phone call from my good colleague, Chief Sultan Hampton, advising me that he was on the scene nearby one of their high schools when people in cars were shooting back and forth, recklessly shooting, driving down a busy street, spraying bullets into unintended targets. Together, we lamented this recurring theme wherein it's well known within the community who's carrying a gun with ill intent, sometimes putting innocent people at risk, and yet no one notifies the police until the damage is done. When you look at the demographics of our homicide victims, however, you'll see that when people fail to intervene, it often results in friends, relatives, and neighbors falling to preventable violence. I want to speak for a moment on behalf of the men and women of the Newport News Police, whether it's the patrol officers who are out serving 24/7 on our streets, to the support staff, to the detectives and forensic crime scene techs who respond to murders at all hours of the day and night. Our collective message is twofold. First, to those who prey on our community, who create fear in neighborhoods, who act violently in ways that civil people would never consider, if you choose to do this in Newport News, keep looking over your shoulder, because we do not rest in our pursuit of violent criminals. Second, to our community members, we continue to ask, when is enough enough? We are consistent in our message. The precursors of violence are not just police problems, they are community problems and can only be solved with community involvement. For the last 3 years, we've been intensely focused on strengthening the philosophy of community-oriented problem-solving policing. But some folks have mistakenly interpreted that community policing is soft on crime. Nothing could be further from the truth. Some of the greatest examples of agencies around the country employing this philosophy are extremely aggressive on crime while operating with a strong focus on community partnerships. Here's the difference. In traditional policing, the police alone act to address crime with little emphasis on community engagement or even the community impact of their enforcement efforts. In community policing, the police and the community together identify and focus on crime problems with a constant dialogue on community impact. Let me give you a very recent and relevant example. This fall, we piloted a concept by borrowing manpower from several sources throughout the department to stand up a violent crime reduction task force. We charged them with focusing on known offenders in known crime hotspots with a special emphasis on getting illegal guns off the street as well as arresting offenders. But before they deployed in an aggressive fashion that's proven successful, we conducted several neighborhood and area resident meetings explaining our purpose and tactics and opening the door for an ongoing dialogue and collaboration. This step would not occur under traditional policing, but we know how critical it is to engage our community and our residents as major stakeholders in quality of life in their neighborhoods. And it worked. To date, we have received no complaints or concerns about heavy-handed tactics or police abuse of authority by task force members, even as they have been prolific in arresting felons and getting guns off the street. While I'm on the Violent Crime Reduction Task Force, in a few minutes we'll go over the results of some of their efforts. Because we have to return some of the officers assigned to the task force, or all of the officers to their assigned positions, we're working very quickly to identify how we can continue the task force concept for a sustained period of time in the midst of our overall staffing crisis. Now, this might be a good time to issue this plea. We are hiring police officers. We're seeking problem solvers, community champions, selfless servants who want to work on something bigger than themselves. We especially want to encourage anyone listening today to spread the word that we're casting a wide net in pursuit of quality officers, including second career folks who seek a higher purpose in their careers. As soon as this briefing ends, I have to rush over to the federal courthouse in Norfolk and testify at a sentencing hearing on a violent offender who shot 2 police officers back in 2013. I plan on telling the judge that an attempt on a police officer's life is an assault on the entire community. It threatens the essence of security and safety that we exist to preserve. It's symbolic to me that on this day, when we see this violent offender sentenced for his heinous acts, we put out notice to others that as a community, we will not tolerate violence. At this time, we want to shift some of our recent successes to update some cases and illustrate what can happen when citizens work with us to address crimes. Now we can jump ahead to that slide. On October 7th, the Bayport Credit Union located at 12512 Warwick was robbed by a female described as 5'5" to 5'7" with a dark long sleeve shirt, baseball cap, sunglasses, and light jeans. On November 25th, a robbery occurred at the First Advantage Federal Credit Union located at 12891 Jefferson. And bank personnel indicated that a female came into the bank, passed a note, indicated she was armed, and demanded cash. The personnel provided a description and what she was wearing and so on. Detectives received surveillance video from both locations, which showed us that the offender appeared to be the same person. Near the end of the year, December 30th, a Union Bank located in York County was robbed. Information obtained during that led to an address in Newport News. The defendant here shown, Cheryl Exum, was taken into custody at a home in Newport News and charged with all 3 robberies. In each case, the citizens provided descriptions identifying this suspect and her vehicle that ultimately led to her arrest. Next slide, please. On January 3rd of this year, at about 12:46, 2 men got into a fist fight inside the Bowie Market and Deli located at 633 Ivy Avenue. During this fight, an unknown male entered the store, produced a handgun, and shot one of the 2 men who were fighting. The unhurt fighter and the shooter then jumped into a maroon-colored 4-door sedan and fled the scene. The shooting victim, a 27-year-old Newport News man, also left the scene and was later located and transported to a local hospital for a non-life-threatening leg wound. You can see by the pictures we obtained excellent video and pictures, and we released these to the media on January 3rd. Because of the ongoing cooperation and partnership we have with the media and the community, we've received several anonymous calls potentially identifying the shooter, and we remain very optimistic as this investigation goes on. But it's a great example where the media has helped us get this information out to the public, and the public responded very well. Next slide. On October 22nd, the Shell station located at 4900 Jefferson was robbed by a male at gunpoint. Employees advised he entered the business with his hooded sweatshirt tied around his face, brandished a firearm, approached the cashiers, and demanded money. The suspect fled on foot. A citizen at the business followed the suspect through neighborhoods. The witness was able to direct responding officers to a vehicle that the suspect climbed into. Officers conducted a traffic stop on the vehicle and observed a large amount of cash and a jacket matching the one worn during the robbery. One of the employees positively identified the suspect as 25-year-old Devon James. Mr. James was arrested and charged with 2 counts of a robbery, burglary while armed, and 3 counts of a firearm in the commission of a felony. The assistance of a citizen in this case was absolutely instrumental in solving it, and it's a great example of citizen cooperation. Next slide. We are going to be purposely ambiguous about this series of incidents for 2 reasons. Number one of the primary actors is a juvenile, and of course we're not allowed to identify or give too many details about juveniles. And number 2, there are a number of cases linked, and we're still actively investigating those and can't jeopardize them. On November 19th, members of the Organized Crime Division Gang Unit and the Violent Crimes Reduction Task Force conducted a traffic stop on a Chrysler rental car that was occupied by a suspect in an ongoing homicide investigation. That suspect is a 17-year-old Newport News man. The vehicle stopped in the 600 block of J. Clyde Morris and was found to be occupied by 3 males, all of whom fled the scene. During the search, officers located 4 firearms, drugs, and drug paraphernalia throughout the vehicle. 2 days later, the 17-year-old juvenile suspect, his 2 male accomplices from the traffic stop, and a female were located in a local area motel. Search warrants were obtained, the tactical unit was called in, and all 4 individuals were arrested without incident. The 17-year-old was arrested on firearms charges, including possession of a stolen firearm, 4 counts, possession of a firearm by a felon, concealed weapon, 2 counts, and possession of a firearm by a juvenile, 2 counts. I hasten to add there will likely be several other significant charges that will follow. The 2 men, 25-year-old Quinard Allen and 23-year-old Michael Lawrence, were each arrested on firearms charges, and 25-year-old Diane Simpson was served with a failure to appear on a felony offense out of Suffolk. We believe this juvenile to be connected with multiple homicides and shooting incidents, and this case remains very much under active consideration. Next slide. On January 2nd of this year, officers were dispatched to Warwick High School in reference to a burglar alarm. A responding officer observed an open trailer with a skateboard outside the doorway. Inside, the officer located and detained 2 masked males. The males were identified as 15 and 16-year-old Newport News residents. The investigation revealed that in addition to the burglary and property damage at the high school, the juveniles are involved in at least 3 other cases, to include arson and vehicle damage exceeding $30,000. We're working closely with our colleagues in the fire department investigating those. The parents were notified and the juveniles turned over to their custody, and petitions are forthcoming. These juveniles were related to another call where I think some of the media has reported where there was an arson and graffiti in the form of a swastika and the letters KKK. And we wanted to highlight this case, even though it's simply property crime, to highlight this fact. We have no tolerance for hate crimes or those who would commit crimes in intimidation. And while in this case, ultimately, it looks like it's the work of two, try and think of a polite way of referring to lack of intelligence, but I'm struggling to find the right way to say that. Two dumb kids acting out, but we didn't know that going in, and we put a lot of energy and resources behind this crime given the fear and intimidation that can come from hate crime-based symbolism. I'd now like to shift over to the results of our Violent Crime Task Force. It was formed to address a spike in violent crime identified in 5 areas throughout the city. The unit began on November 1st and consisted of 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 5 detectives from the Organized Crime Division, 6 uniformed patrol officers, and 1 canine officer. In just 2 months, the task force has made a significant impact on violent crime, and their efforts were responsible for 66 arrests, resulting in 165 felony charges, 82 misdemeanor charges, 26 fugitives apprehended, 29 firearms recovered, and you can see on the screen the arrests were distributed throughout the city. Now, my executive team and I spent a good hour and a half this morning brainstorming on how are we going to staff and continue this program when the officers currently in that assignment have to go back to their existing assignments. We are committed to providing continuity and sustaining this effort. You can't argue with results like this. And so we are going to find a way to pull together a team. I anticipate there will be some continuity with even some of the members of the team so that we have good continuity on their efforts. Now we'd like to briefly address 2016 from a homicide and shooting perspective. I know you're not going to be able to make a lot of sense from a distance. We will provide electronic copies to anyone in the media who wishes this. In fact, we can provide you with this entire PowerPoint if that would be helpful to you. Noteworthy in this chart that I want to draw to your attention is the prevalence of a prior relationship between the victims and the offenders. These are most often not stranger-on-stranger crimes. And note that even many of the robberies show a prior acquaintance. Some factors, you might say, how can that be? Well, sometimes people arrange to meet for other purposes, whether illegal or legal. And opportunistic people might prey on even people that they know, given the opportunity. And sometimes that results in violence. When you look, let's go to the shooting slide now. And there are several pages of these. We had, as you know, about 120 non-fatal shootings, shooting victims. I forget how many offenses. It's somewhat less than that because in some cases we had more than one victim. But when you look at our 2016 shootings, the noteworthy element here is the dominant number of victims who are uncooperative with the police. Now, we have had mothers of shooting victims tell us they know their sons knew who shot them, but they will not cooperate with the investigators, instead saying, "I'll handle it." This is where we again point out the community needs to step forward and help us lower gun violence. We all know what it means. "I'll take care of it" is code for there's going to be more shootings. And we have to break this cycle. If our victims won't talk with us and we have nothing to work on, the police aren't going to break that cycle. It's going to require the entire community to come together so that we can address gun violence. Both the homicide and the shooting analysis are indicators that for some in our community, carrying and using guns is the norm. For most law-abiding citizens, however, that is not normative behavior, and it must stop. We will continue to put a very strong emphasis on reducing gun-related violence. Finally, it must be said not to vilify the victims whose families grieve at their loss. No one deserves to die at the hands of another in violence. But all too often, lives are lost when people take risks or make choices that put them at great risk of violence. As a community, we must change that narrative, hold people accountable for making negative choices, even as we help them aim towards better outcomes. And to that end, I tip my hat to our colleagues that are here from the Youth and Gang Violence Outreach effort. That's entirely what their initiative is. The City of Newport News, our elected officials here, and the city manager have made a huge investment, financial investment, resource investment in working with youth and getting proactive to get ahead of youth violence and gang violence. In a partnership, one half can only go so far before the other half has to come in. And that's really the message and the plea we want to stress today. Now, as we move forward throughout this year, and as we continue to be as transparent and proactive as possible, we're going to do several things. First, we're going to conduct these bi-monthly briefings. I want to urge the media, please participate. If we're going to get balance in the reporting, if we're going to help people understand that if you come to Newport News to shop, to go to the movies, if you live here, you are at no greater risk for violence here than in any city around the country. However, you may be at risk if you make bad choices or put yourself at risk. That's a story that is not being captured in the media day in and day out. So we're going to try and fill that gap at these briefings. And we're going to talk about the rest of the story, success stories, the consequences for people who choose to act violently once we resolve that crime and get them into the justice system. We're still seeking a name, by the way, for these briefings, and we welcome your creative input on that. We're also hoping to better inform our residents as crimes are unfolding using Facebook Live streaming from crime scenes. We're doing that right now. Our PIO office is live streaming this press briefing, and we're going to pilot doing it at some of our crime scenes so that our public information officers, investigators, supervisors are going to be able to give real-time information out to the community. Finally, I'm going to begin a weekly blog. It will commence next Monday. The URL is here on the screen for you to use. Mr. Borey has already blessed us putting something in Newport News Now that goes out to upwards of 70,000 plus people to invite them to participate in the blog. And we would welcome your input and suggestions and ideas for blog entries. We're going to use this as an opportunity again to put some context behind what is the crime story in Newport News, what are we doing about it, and where are we going. We'll hope to see everyone back sometime, probably in the next few weeks. We thank you sincerely for coming out, and again, repeated thanks to our elected officials and our other dignitaries and criminal justice partners who took time today to come show support for our efforts. Thank you.